Hi, I'm Ann Coulter. Welcome to my Substack. I have my most important guests ever, my friend Peter Thiel, who created, unlike most billionaires, he's actually making the world a better place and not just moving money around, created PayPal first, angel investor in Facebook, Palantir, which has changed the world in a good way, and many, many other companies. Wall Street Journal wrote sometime in the past year how everyone made fun of Peter for his 20 under 20 program, paying smart college kids to not go to college or to drop out of college and to start some new company, some new entrepreneurial idea. Everyone laughed at him at the time, as Wall Street Journal said, and ha, his fund has outperformed the market gigantically. Anyway, I want Peter to tell a story he has told me. I think it should be made into a movie, at least to start, and that is the story of how he destroyed Gawker. Welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you. It's a great privilege to be on your show, Ann.
That Gawker story, as I was just telling you, you told us once at dinner with Jim Downey, comedy writer, held us spellbound, the full story, and to this day Downey says, I can't believe nobody's made a movie out of that. So let's start from the beginning, which was Christmas at my house. I don't know if you even remember. Oh, you were mad.
Remind me what?
Well, you were just, and I mean, you had a good point. I'm used to being defamed by the media, but you were saying these gossip columns destroying people's lives just for fun, which was Gawker's specialty. It is of no public interest.
Yes.
These aren't public figures. It's just, let's humiliate this person. And you were saying they're terrorists, they're not journalists. And you started cogitating through that entire dinner of how possibly a company like this could be destroyed, and it involved lawyers.
Well, it was, man, there was a long prehistory on this, and I think Gawker was sort of one of these very bad things that came along with the internet in the early 2000s, and it pretended to be edgy. Sometimes the stories were partially true, sometimes they were made up. Often they did not involve people who were remotely public figures.
Right.
And it was in many ways deeply sociopathic, where it was just designed to hurt people in all these ways. And they had different they had one that was focused on Hollywood and one that was focused on DC, and then there was one called one affiliated website called Wallywag that then decided to do this for Silicon Valley, and it was sort of this. And it was sort of starting already in 2005, 2006. It was a variety of people I know just got attacked, and it, in some ways, there was sort of a way that people always underestimated the damage these things did.
Yes.
You don't want to exaggerate it, but you also don't want to underestimate it.
Yes.
Where there was a feud it suggested existed between me and another venture firm, and then. It actually created the feud, and then the other venture firm, which was this established firm, Sequoia Capital, tried to sabotage our venture fund, Founders Fund, in 2007 and discourage people from investing.
Wow!
And, it probably, I don't know. It was the most successful fund that I ever did, and it was something like, we ended up raising $230 million, but probably it was $100 million we didn't raise, and it took us 6 months longer to get the fund in. And in some ways, it was not directly caused by Gawker, but it was this incredibly toxic environment they created. And there was just always this conversation: what can you do about this? And then basically, they'd attack, and then I got attacked at various points as well, personally.
Oh, you were a big focus.
And
it was vicious, not just about you. There was that girl, just an utterly random, unknown girl who got drunk. Some guy rapes her in the bathroom, and it was videoed. And Gawker put that up. That isn't a public figure. That isn't of any interest to anyone.
No, it was just, it was just anything to generate, page clicks or something like this. And then it was always, what do you do? And there was this crazy collective action problem because, the general response was you couldn't do anything. If you even commented on it, you'd sort of be fueling the fire.
Yes.
If you complained, they'd beat you up even more, and it would somehow encourage them to beat you up even more. And it was always, you were supposed to bury your head in the sand and hope that they would move on and beat up somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And there were sort of a variety of different ideas I experimented with. There was a sort of a prehistory where I thought maybe I should find a good criminal defense lawyer in Manhattan and find a way to go after these people. And it was this guy, Eddie Hayes, who was he was in the Tom Wolfe novel Bonfire of the Vanities, the one good character is the criminal defense lawyer.
Oh.
And he was modeled after this guy, Eddie Hayes. And so Alexandra, Tom Wolfe's daughter, introduced me to him. He was her godfather. And I met with him, and it was sort of, in Manhattan, and he was, everything was just being done with $100 bills, and it was sort of dealing with all these somewhat sketchy criminal people. And so, I want to figure out a way to really get these Gawker people, and maybe, maybe you could help me figure out how to get them into jail or something like that. And then he said, well, you don't look like a very revengeful person to me, Peter. and it turned out he was already on their payroll. And
you're kidding!
And it was like they had
Whoa!
They had Manhattan wired.
Whoa!
They were based in New York City, and it was, wow, if we're going to do this, we have to be so much more careful.
I did not know that part of the story.
And then he set up a few meetings between me and this guy Corey Sika, who's an editor at Gawker, and
How did you find out he was on their payroll?
He just told me.
Oh, okay.
He told me, he said, you should just talk to them. And then we got a few breakfasts, and it was like, how do we get Nick Denton, the owner of Gawker, to be a little bit nicer and less mean? And it was just, well, there's nothing you can do. But all he lives for is gossip and destroying people. That's what the editor told me. And on one level, it was discouraging. There was there was nothing conventional you could do. There was obviously nothing you could do. Nothing I wanted to do directly anymore.
Yep.
And then
and no one ever found out. For people who don't know, that Gawker was brought down without anyone ever knowing you were behind.
They eventually found out, but not till it was over. It was over. But and so our code name we came up for Gawker, which we felt they had all of New York City wired, was the MBTO, the Manhattan-based terrorist organization, and then, but then it was a few years later. I was doing an event at Oxford, and there was I was introduced to a friend who was a law student there, and he was an Australian law student, and so he was not.
Oh, I thought this happened in Australia.
And so he was not in any way connected to me.
Yes.
And we started talking about this, and then sort of over the next year, Aaron convinced me that
that's the Australian.
The Australian guy. He convinced me maybe if you can't do something about this, nobody can do something, and then maybe we could set something up where he would mastermind it. He would not be connected to me. Even if people figured out he was doing it, people would suspect the Murdochs or something like that. And then we didn't want to, and we set up a whole law firm to bring cases against Gawker, and we obviously couldn't do one in New York. We didn't want to do one in Silicon Valley. We figured we'd do a Los Angeles-based law firm because there were probably a lot of aggrieved celebrities who were secretly on our side, obviously, since they were among the worst of the targets. So there were, so many. Even if people thought there was, some conspiracy going on, it would be hard to figure out. So so given the prehistory, we set it up, and then sort of around mid to late 2012, we finally got the law firm set up, and you did this thorough search of all these articles, and you just contacted people. And
when they were attacked by Gawker.
When they were attacked by Gawker, and one of the first ones that came up was this article involving Hulk Hogan, the wrestler, where they had a videotape of him having sex with his best friend's wife, that was secretly filmed in his best friend's bedroom and then got put onto Gawker. So it was a sort of egregious violation of
And
private.
the husband of the girl was the one who set up the camera?
Presumably, but it was not known to Hulk Hogan. His real name's Terry Bollea, and then somehow this had happened years earlier, but somehow the tape got leaked to Gawker, and then they got millions of page views and just posted it on their site, and there were sort of all sorts of people who had better cases, but Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, told us that he's a fighter. He was going to fight it all the way to the end, and he was at least willing to start the litigation.
Yeah.
And there were, we brought a few other cases, but
oh, you did?
We brought a few other ones. We tried to bring cases though that did not involve libel, ever. So they were always because we didn't want the media to circle the wagons around Gawker.
Oh.
So we brought there was a case we brought for that they weren't paying their workers minimum wage in New York, and they were violating labor laws, and we thought that might be a case that might work even in front of a very liberal Manhattan judge. And then there was another one where it had sort of destroyed someone's professional career.
Oh, I think I remember that one. Yeah.
Unjustified rape allegations, but they were sort of not. We were very careful never to claim libel.
That's very smart.
We wanted to separate them out, and then the Florida one was, it was privacy, which is not the way I didn't notice at the time, but the way you always differentiate is the First Amendment is about freedom of speech. The Fifth Amendment is about unreasonable search and seizure, which means not just the government can't just go in your bedroom, but it's also a private actor can't just go in your bedroom and secretly film what's going on. And even though you have freedom of speech in the press, and that's the First Amendment, there's also this Fifth Amendment, and there's sort of and we were focused on this right to privacy, but anyway, we brought and so we start we start bringing these different lawsuits.
I hope no liberal is watching this, because I don't want them to know how to destroy an entity.
They're doing this all the time already, so right. They're doing this all the time, and then we had and then there was always sort of this question: was this just like a hopelessly quixotic quest? Where so one hypothesis was, this is just crazy. You can't take on a media company like this and ever win, and then the other hypothesis we had going into it was maybe it's just everyone's too intimidated and nobody tries.
Yes.
So maybe it's actually really possible to do this, and which of these two hypotheses are true? And sort of an early indication for the second one was by the summer of 2013, so maybe 6 months after we bring the Hulk Hogan case. It's fairly mechanical in a lawsuit. You get to a deposition. We get to Nick Denton's deposition, summer of 2013. First question in the deposition. Have you ever appeared in a court of law? Answer: no. Second question: have you ever been deposed? Answer: no. And at that point, in discovery, we had learned there were 3,000 people who had complained to Gawker, but we were the first one to actually get to a deposition.
Wow.
And that was an evidence for hypothesis number 2.
Yes.
That people were so intimidated they didn't even try.
Yes.
And we had already gotten further than anybody else, and who knows?
Wow.
Maybe it was this all-powerful entity that could just crush you, or maybe
it just gave out that image and scared people like a blowfish.
If it ever came to an actual trial, it would be quite catastrophic. And then, it's a long, drawn-out process. There are all kinds of there are all sorts of crazy dynamics.
And the law firm that was handling this they didn't even know you were behind it, right?
They
communicated with the Australian.
Yes, and it was Aaron had set up this entity in Australia called the Australian energy company. And it was sort of like we were interested in something, very kinetic, high energy, very destructive and kinetic. And then I think he would talk to the LA law firm and tell them there was sort of this large number of principals behind him that he had to consult with, and I think they assumed there was like nobody at all. It was just himself or something. But they didn't ask too many questions, and I think and Hulk Hogan also didn't ask too many questions.
That's right.
Because it was just, in some sense, the most natural thing in the world that someone would do this.
Would come and fund his lawsuit. So, you're right. That's crazy. Why did he believe that?
I think probably there probably are a lot of celebrities who have a slightly distorted perspective on reality like that. So he was in some ways he was a fairly good plaintiff. People thought he was wealthy enough to do it himself.
That's right.
The reality was that after a close to 35-year career in pro wrestling, it was almost broke. And then there were some ways in which he also looked like this super fake plaintiff, and so people didn't take him that seriously for a while. And then the case gradually proceeds. We get there are all sorts of crazy shenanigans on both sides behind the scenes. One of the crazy ones that was that there was there was this lawyer who contacts Hogan, Keith Davidson. He was also a lawyer involved in the Stormy Daniels thing years later. So he's this sort of super sketchy lawyer who is in the business of selling back sex tapes to celebrities and things like this. And he said that he had the remaining part of the tape, which was more dangerous than the sex tape.
Because he used the N-word.
Because Hulk Hogan uses the N-word in a later part of the sex tape. And he's willing to sell it back to Mr. Hogan. That's
amazing that is the worst thing. I just want to pause and comment on that. Adultery, cheating with your best friend's wife, I don't know, that's fine. But you used a word. Okay, go ahead.
But everyone knew that was much worse.
Yes.
And so they... And then it's of course, if an average person did this, it would just be blackmail or something like this. But if a lawyer represents somebody who wants to sell something back to you, that's perfectly acceptable. And then Hogan organizes this FBI sting to expose these people for blackmail, and they sort of do an audio recording where they're trying to sell the tape to him, and then the FBI agents storm in.
And this is before you came in.
I think it's around the same time.
Okay.
And then the FBI agents storm in and seize the tape
from Davidson.
From Davidson, and but then the audio doesn't get recorded properly, and then the tape gets stolen from the FBI office a year later.
Wow, our FBI is doing great.
And so this is just sort of this thing that's going on in the background, and then so fast forward to summer of 2015, the trial is finally about to happen, and on the eve of the trial. It then gets postponed, but on the eve of the trial, the other part of the tape with the N-word drops and gets farmed out to the National Enquirer.
Who dropped it? Davidson?
Or
whomever taped it?
Presumably the Gawker people, because they wanted to make.
So you think they had it all along?
Or they were aware of it, or something like this.
Okay.
But I think they were somehow, there was some way where they were like in cahoots with this person who was trying to sell back.
And if somebody else publishes violates the privacy, it doesn't make Gawker as just one of many.
It's also good on that level, but it was just to really bloody up Hogan on the eve of the trial, and then and so then it gets dropped. He then gets fired from the wrestling. WME.
That was the first time you found out about the second part.
Yeah,
I
had not tracked this part at all. And then he gets fired from that in fall of 2015, and at that point we have to do everything we can to stop him from settling. But it finally gets to trial in March of 2016, and we have this intuition that and I'm just wondering, like, what actually does it take for a case like this to go to a trial? there was all these complicated maneuvers. Was it going to be in state court or federal court? We got it removed to state court, and in some ways we kind of hit the jackpot with the judge. It was Pamela Campbell. She was the Terry Chavo defense lawyer in the 2000s, had been appointed by Jeb Bush, and she sort of this conservative Christian lady who did not approve of Gawker in any way, and it was sort of in Tampa, Hogan's hometown, and so we thought that if we ever got to trial, it was going to be a really crazy zoo, and then they came in with even higher settlement. I think they were offering $5 or $6 million
and Hulk must have wanted
in fall
to keep settling.
of 2015, and then on the eve of the trial it was up to $11 million, but we kept. So
the lawyers in LA are having to come up with a reason for him not to settle. They say, no, you have a good case. We're going to do so much better at trial.
Yeah, he was not quite as firm as he had led us to believe he was going to be 3 years earlier, but we convinced him to go all the way to the trial, and then you get this. And then at this point, it finally you're able to just present all this material to the jury, and it is and there were sort of all these kinds of things of what can you tell the jury, and
could you tell them about the rape in the bathroom that they posted?
There were all sorts of nasty articles in Gawker that you could talk about. There was a deposition we had with this guy A.J. Dolario, who had been the editor that had posted the sex tape. And deposition's like an all-day thing. You have a lunch break. You come back after lunch, and I'm not against people smoking marijuana. I don't recommend that you do it in the middle of a lunch break during a deposition. So he comes back after lunch, reeks of marijuana. And then our lawyer asks him, is there any sex tape you wouldn't publish? And he says, well, I suppose if it involved a child. And then the lawyer asks him, well, what age child? Like a 5-year-old was the cutoff for the age of the sex tape you wouldn't publish. And he was just stoned, and thought this was just a funny thing to say. And then we were sure to play that to the jury and to time it so that the 5-year-old child comment was just before the jury had a lunch break and could discuss it amongst themselves. So you sort of time all these things. There was, there were sort of all these super nasty articles that they asked, where they just asked Nick Denton to read the articles in the nicest way he could imagine and make them sound like they were nice. And that was, they're just, these things were very hard to do. So once you get to the trial, it's just As
the trial is going on, are you getting reports every day?
Aaron showed up at the courthouse the first day or first few days, and he runs into Judge Campbell somewhere in the hallway and tells her, I'm a student of the law, not a law student, a student of the law, and I'm interested in where this trial's going on. And then in this sort of southern drawl, come right along, I'm the presiding judge, and it's sort of the show of a lifetime, that it's the best trial that she's ever going to have in her life. And then there were all sorts of, crazy moments. But and then our lawyer decides, after 2 weeks of this, to ask for $100 million in damages, and figures that's the largest amount you can ask for with a straight face. And then after 7 hours, the jury comes back and gives us $115 million, and then they include another $25 million in punitive damages, ups it to $140 million. Some of the jurors later told us that they felt Gawker had underrepresented, that they was wealthier than they were led to believe, and they would have put in even more in damages. But even though they didn't have anywhere nearly that amount of money. And then 2 weeks later, 2 months later, it pushes Gawker into bankruptcy. They have to file for bankruptcy protection, it's Denton goes personally bankrupt, Gawker goes bankrupt, and Dolario goes bankrupt. And just sort of one other side note on how these things work. Normally, what would happen, you would still then have years of appeals, and somehow Mr. Hogan would get very little of the money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there wasn't 140 million, but you know, 4 or 5 months later, they actually settled with Hogan, and they paid him $31 million.
Wow!
And so he got $31 million out of this, and you know, he was probably down to his last 4 or 5 million. So it was, in some ways,
yes,
even in a financial sense, was the comeback of a lifetime.
Yes.
And I think there sort of was an interesting, crazy side story of how he got the $31 million. Why would they give it to this person who's, you know, like, you know, I don't know, you know, the Manhattan media, the MBTO probably dislikes as much as they dislike Mr. Trump,
right,
or somebody like that. And why would they, you know, if they're going bankrupt, you know, nobody gets any money, and we're going to waste all the money in bankruptcy for years, and you know, why would they get him $31 million? And so one side anecdote that I think was very important, and this is again is where these cases always get driven by all the sort of subtle details and figuring out what's really going on. And this was in December of 2015. So this is 3 months before we come to trial. And there are three different entities we've sued. There's Gawker, which is the media company. There is Kinja, which is a Hungarian affiliate of Gawker's. And this is, you often have these international affiliates where you have sort of a fake IP agreement, and you send money to the international company for IP, and then it's incorporated in a country where you have a lower corporate tax rate. It's sort of a tax avoidance scheme. And Denton was half Hungarian, and then there were maybe other sketchy things you could do in Hungary because it's this weird language, and there's sort of probably a lot of criminal stuff going on in that country. And then you had a Cayman Islands holding company. So those were the three Gawker, the three different Gawker entities. So 3 months before we go to trial, Aaron is in London randomly, and you know, he's been thinking about this case nonstop for over 3 years. And he gets to his hotel room. He's jet lagged. He gets on his computer, and you know, the Google search box pops up, and he just sort of half asleep types in Gawker UK, and up pops an entity, Gawker Limited, a UK corporation that nobody was aware of the existence. And then under UK law, you could find out who had set up this corporation, and it was the board. Who's on the board of the corporation? And the board was Denton's sister, and it was somebody affiliated with Kinja, the Hungarian company, and it was a Chicago lawyer who was an expert in avoiding tort judgments.
When had it been set up?
It had been set up in late 2014. So
wow.
As this thing was heating up.
To move money there.
And you know, we could never quite prove it. It made for an incredibly dramatic day in court where we announced that we had a fourth defendant to join, and then they had to consult, and then they were going to fight it tooth and nail.
Was Denton in the room?
No, but it was the lawyers had not heard of this fourth defendant, and then they were going to fight it tooth and nail. We couldn't, you know, it was going to delay the trial by months. We didn't want to risk that, but they knew that we knew about this fourth entity is the key thing. And what we suspect happened was that, you know, there was money that had been transferred from Gawker to the Kinja affiliate, and then the Kinja affiliate, you know, nobody can understand Hungarian, the language, the accounting's all fraudulent, and they had moved maybe $10 million, something like that is what we guess, to the UK entity, which was fully controlled by Denton. And so it was like a way of, in effect, fraudulently conveying money out of his company, stealing money, or you know, moving it to this different entity. And you can think of it as a getaway car. And then it's like a bank robber where you have a vanity plate on your getaway car that says getaway. If they had called it anything other than Gawker, yes, we would have never figured this out, yes, right? So this was like just the craziest thing ever. They called it Gawker. That's how we figured out that this was the fourth. This was their getaway car. And then again, the sort of in the weeds legal nuance is that under bankruptcy law, there's always a look back period. So if you go bankrupt, and 24 hours before you file bankruptcy, you give all your money to somebody else, we have a look back and can make sure that we can mm-hmm. claw that money back. And the look back period normally extends, in New York where Denton was based, it was a 3-year look back period. And so when the case gets lost in March of 2016, Denton files for bankruptcy, I think May, June of 2016. So you have a look-back period to mid-2013. And so the Gawker Limited would be this entity that had been set up in late 2014. It was too late. And we would be able to, the creditors would be able to go after it and claw back some of the money.
And they got it?
No, we never did, but they paid Hogan $31 million, and then we promised not to look into it. So he got to keep the money. But that's how Hogan gets the 30.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but still a pretty good job.
That's how Hogan gets the $31 million.
Yeah. And then how long after?
It was. You have to think of it as probably stolen from the employees. I mean, they were really. There is probably a sort of a Marxist analysis of this. There were all sorts of conspiratorial things we want to take credit for. There was a unionization effort at Gawker that I don't think we had anything to do with, but where the employees unionized, and then probably they were right to unionize because it was like a rather exploitative company, and it culminated with the management stealing the money
from the employees
and sending it to this getaway car.
So then headlines all over, Hulk Hogan has destroyed Gawker. How long before at the time I was telling someone I would never mention it directly to you in emails, assuming everything is read. And I just say, hey, did you see this interesting case? So how long after the first headlines, Gawker destroyed, did it come out that you were the evil genius behind
it? Was about 2 months after it that it came out. I think this is probably was a moral failing on my part that I could not resist bragging about it, and it was just you were. And I had found it hard to resist even for the 3 years it was going on.
Yes.
And there were all these conversations I had with people where it was all these crazy surreal ones. I'll bet you $1 million that Gawker won't exist in a year. And people thought it was just like this crazy person. Or I remember there was a conversation we had in San Francisco in the group of friends in February 2016. It was this dinner, and my friend Aaron was there at the dinner, and then one of the other people was this lawyer who worked at Google, and he said, well, there's this interesting case coming up in Florida involving the First Amendment and Hulk Hogan, and then I couldn't resist piping up and saying, well, I think it's actually about the Fifth Amendment and the right to privacy, and it's a very different fact pattern. And then the lawyer commented, wow, it's really impressive. These people know so much about these things. But then one of the other people at the dinner figured out that both Aaron and I knew too much.
Oh, really?
And then sort of figured it out. So
did he tell you later?
Yeah, he told me at the time that he had figured something out. So there were sort of people who put it together, but it was probably on some level, it was too crazy to believe, and this is always,
it was such a great story.
And then, it was, there's a revisionist history that Gawker likes to say that they thought they were pretty sure that there was a conspiracy and I was part of it or something like this.
Well, you met the lawyer at the Hollywood Reporter party in New York. I introduced you to him and couldn't separate you after that. I really wanted to hear the conversation, and that's what he was claiming. They didn't know, obviously, that it was you, but I think it was he was saying, we keep upping the settlement offer and Hulk is refusing to take it.
There probably were things that were odd. On the other hand, if Nick Denton had called an all-hands meeting, the employees, and said there is a secret super-duper conspiracy out to destroy the company, it would have just been like absurd. It was like peddling conspiracy theories.
That's
and
true.
You can't do that. And we don't believe this stuff. We're sophisticated people. We don't believe these things are possibly true. And so I think there was, and it was somewhat protective for a long time because people, even with me bragging to more people than I should have, and then a lot more after we won in March of 2016 than I should have, people found it hard to believe. So there was, for example, in the middle of the trial, there's an article that comes up on a legal blog, and it is entitled, "Is a Secret Gawker Hater Funding the Hulk Hogan Lawsuit?" And then the analysis is there are 3 possible ways it could be funded. It could be funded by Mr. Hogan, but he doesn't have any money. And then secondly, it could be funded by the lawyers, but they never take this much risk. And then third, that leaves only another possibility that someone's funding it. And then the lawyer had actually picked up, the reporter had actually picked up on these rumors circulating around Tampa. Where, you know, it's like, what's going on and who's doing it.
So did they speculate who it might be?
No, it was just they heard these rumors floating around, and this was the article. But then, as late as March 2016, I have an emergency call with Aaron. Wow, we better move fast. Our cover's about to be blown. Right. Hopefully, we have 1 more week till the jury comes down with a verdict, and we need to move really fast here. And then, but then you have a Reddit thread on this article, and this was not engineered by us. But then everybody denounces the writer of the article.
Oh, that's
you should
great.
be ashamed of yourself peddling conspiracy theories like this. And then it's like asking, who killed Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, and you just have sort of all these layers of crazy, and it just gets denounced by everybody.
That's great.
And so, I genuinely don't think we orchestrated that. We didn't do all those posts on Reddit.
Man, that
so
was brilliant.
It's probably hard to pull off these sort of conspiracies, but you can maybe get away with more than you think, because in a world where people say that everything's a crazy conspiracy theory,
right,
you are somewhat protected. And so it was somewhat protected, but then it was in some ways my fault. They somehow tracked down Aaron early on, and he didn't. The reporter called him up in May 2016, when my involvement.
Well, that could leak because everybody at the law firm knew him.
They didn't really know who he was. I think it was just the top 2 lawyers knew his identity, and somehow they tracked him down from Forbes that sort of leaked the story, and but he managed to deflect them for another year, and he just answered the phone. It was very fast thinking. I'm a writer I'm calling you from Forbes, and it was Forbes magazine. I don't want a subscription. Click. And that distracted.
Oh, I love this guy.
That distracted them for about a year or 2.
But okay, back to the law firm that was actually handling it. Who did they think this guy Aaron was? They didn't care. You're paying us.
I think it's people didn't. I think they didn't think there was anything that elaborate behind it.
Or like you say, if anything, they thought it was Murdoch.
Maybe. I think they somehow thought Aaron was just representing himself.
A very rich man.
Presumably, but they didn't know who he was.
Huh. And he just says, "I want to destroy Gawker."
I think that was the Occam's razor explanation.
Yeah.
You have this secret privy council in the background, and maybe it's just you. So I think they thought they didn't really know who it was, and they assumed he somehow had a lot more money than people realized.
And now people walk around you and look at you with a lot more respect after it came out. I'm on Twitter, you're not. After it came out that it was you, it was pretty hilarious. Every journalist on Twitter kept tweeting out, "I think Peter Thiel is the handsomest, smartest, most wonderful philanthropic person I know."
Well, it's certainly there always are these, it was very motivational for me to tell myself during this entire process that Gawker was uniquely evil, and that if we did something about them, we'd fix all the media, and this might have been slightly delusional or intentionally self-delusional or something like that. It was motivational to believe these things, surely. But I think there is a way that even though there's an awful lot of stuff that's still sociopathic, destructive, I do think there is a retrospective where Gawker was uniquely problematic in a way that there's nothing quite like that left in 2024, because there was sort of a moment from maybe 2002 till 2014, 2015 or so, when you could use the internet to destroy people, but the people who read these articles didn't process how biased it was, how distorted it was. They didn't discount it appropriately. And at this point, I think we still have a media that's in ways ideologically deranged, or just economically, the people are angry. There are all these things that are sort of not working about it. But everyone knows it.
Yes.
And everyone knows that they're biased and angry people, and it can still be effective in some contexts, but it's somehow way less powerful than it was during that period.
Yes, I think you're right. What the gossip columns used to do to me was, if they knew I'd been a certain place, a restaurant in New York, Publix in Florida, all they needed to know was that I had been there, and they would write absolutely crazy things
and people would
defamatory
and people
things.
would somewhat believe it.
Yes, the only one I remember, because one was Publix in Florida, and it was a crazy thing, and I had emailed Drudge about it and said, why don't they just say I'm running down the aisles naked? And he said, well, I saw this and figured you weren't even in Florida. So now I think everyone is Drudge and knows it's all just made up.
And it is, I think you don't want to be entirely sanguine about these things, and there's probably some point where these things are still genuinely damaging, but it's extraordinary how much these things now get discounted.
And also, I think it's changed in the sense of there are very few, there never were, like legitimate spottings of someone famous, and now it's all just written by the agent and gets sent in. You'll see pictures of people like on vacation throwing something, and wow, that angle is perfect.
Yes.
How can someone in the bushes have gotten that picture?
Yes.
No, you're wearing powder, you're made up before you get on the paddleboard. It's all just sent in by the agent.
And so, there's something about, we know enough about how the sausage making works in the factory, and then the sausage making factory only functions when people don't know how it works.
Right.
And so it's somehow not let's say the hate factory that is so much of the liberal media.
Yes.
Is not working anymore because people are seeing how it works.
Yes.
And it's one of these things that only works when you don't know how it works.
Right.
And there was this moment in the 2000s through maybe the first half of the 2010s where the internet was this very effective. There were parts of the internet that were this extremely effective hate factory, and people thought they thought of Gawker as like, I don't know, the truth.
Thanks for watching. Tune in to part 2 to find out why you shouldn't go to college with Peter Thiel.
The fraudulence of the humanities is Harvard, the fraudulence of the sciences was the Stanford story, and somehow they're two different sides of the same coin.
You can watch complete episodes of Unsafe with Ann Coulter by subscribing to anncoulter.substack.com. That's anncoulter.substack.com. You can also listen to complete episodes for free at Ricochet.com. Choose Unsafe from the pull-down menu at the top of the page. That's Ricochet.com, your home for civil center right conversation on the web.